me see. And I believe that we are. Yep, cool. We're live. Awesome. So, uh, hi everyone. I'm Lisa Kastner. I'm here with the amazing Cheryl Reed. This just shows you it's Saturday morning and I haven't had enough coffee. Uh, for one of our fantastic 20 questions. So, for those who may not be familiar with Cheryl, she is the author of Map of My Escape, which will be coming out June 18th of this year. It is honestly already gotten a ton of great attention and amazing, amazing reviews. If again, if you're not familiar, so what it's about is a shooting of a homicide detective which is captured on film by a mysterious figure from a second floor window, implicating Riley Keene, an anti-gun activist and a school shooting survivor. Now, Riley flees Chicago for a frozen island in Lake Superior. A race to find her ensues between her secret lover, a Chicago politician, Finn O'Farrell, a corrupt police lieutenant, and the mysterious cameraman who extorts Riley's family and Flynn. I mean, just that alone, who the heck wouldn't want to read that? Like, give me a break, people. We're actually going to hear a lot more around Map of My Escape and like the influences associated with it and everything in a little while. In a couple weeks, we're going to have another interview with Cheryl, which I'm again super excited about. In the meantime, we're here on 20 questions. So, my first question for you. So, honestly, who's your favorite author?
So I thought a lot about this question, and I thought I would do for show and tell.
Ooh.
Well, this, let's see if you could see this. So
Yes.
I really like Tana French. Now, Tana French is, if you don't know her, she is a Irish, she has some connection with Chicago, but Irish writer, and she writes literary thriller. I've read all her books, but In the Woods, it was actually made into a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Loved it. Hated the ending. There really isn't an ending.
Oh, got it.
Sorry about that. But and then she also wrote The Likeness, which is also one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like Gillian Flynn. She's an old favorite, but I prefer her second book, which is Dark Places.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know about this. The movie wasn't all that great, but the writing in here is fantastic. So I really am a fan of Gillian, although she hasn't really done much lately. Jane Hamilton is an old favorite of mine. She's a literary writer. She doesn't write thrillers. She doesn't write plot-driven books, but I would say A Map of the World, which I use an epigraph in the Map of My Escape, which is from this book. And this book talks a lot about maps and the idea of maps. And that's kind of where I got the original idea of, what about a map of somebody who's a fugitive? How would you do that? So I also really like Karen Slaughter. Now, a lot of people know of Karen. She's a big thriller, mystery writer. I like Karen a lot, although I have to say I recommended her books to people, and some people really can't take the graphicness of the violence. So she does write about graphic violence to women. So and some people just can't take that.
Got it.
Another person I really like is Donna Tartt. Now, Donna is a literary writer. You might know that I think she won the Nobel National Book Award for her last book. But The Secret History is my favorite. I think that it's a thriller. It's not really meant to be a thriller, but it's a literary thriller. And if you haven't noticed, all of these are women writers. I'm a big fan of women writers, but I do have a male writer that I recommend highly. I've read all his books, and by the way, I've read all of the books by all these authors. So,
of course,
is Wayne Johnston, and he's a Canadian historical fiction, and he writes about Newfoundland, which is a pretty inhospitable place to live, but he writes about it in a way that makes you want to go there. So those are sort of the influences, I would say, and the people I really love to read.
Wow. That's an amazing, amazing list. So I'm definitely going to go back and watch this video so I can take more notes and check out
You
any
know,
books that I may not have seen.
you
Yeah.
know what I do is I keep all my favorite books in the shelf right
Oh my
next
God.
to where I write. And then
Nice.
when I am stumped or I feel like, oh, I need some inspiration, I just pull
Mhm.
one of those books out and flip through it.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's so smart. That's I have several author friends who they have like a stash of books that they consider to be either like, dear God, if I could write this way, I would be a super genius. And
Yeah.
like, this is my stash of like, uh, this is the most amazing storytelling I've ever seen. And, to your point, they go back to them when either they're stuck or it's like a mandatory, I must read this at least once a year kind of
Mhm,
story.
mhm,
So yeah, very cool.
mhm.
So we talked about your favorite authors, and I was just curious. So, who do you feel really influenced your writing?
Well, I will say that, growing up, I think most writers just read constantly. I mean, I was one of those who couldn't be without a book in my hand and, went to the library early. I don't, and I don't know that it was really literary reading. It was just something to take your mind to another place and to believe. And I
Mm,
think all of these authors, I think the thing that they have in common is that they have a way of telling a story and spinning a lie, right? They're
right.
telling you a dream and they're getting you to believe in that dream and that fantastical place and to keep entering into that world,
Hmm.
and suspending your disbelief. So I think that's, I wouldn't say I ever have a one favorite, but I would say that all of these people have influenced everything I've written for sure.
Very cool. And so, what inspired you to specifically write Map of My Escape?
So, Map of My Escape is my second novel. My first novel is called Poison Girls, and it was about a little bit of historical fiction because it really was set in Chicago, and it really was about young suburban girls dealing with taking fentanyl laced heroin,
Hmm.
and it was a game that they were playing. So that was kind of based on reality. I used to be a crime reporter for
Mm.
many years, and I was always afraid I was going to have to respond to a mass shooting.
Oh, wow.
And luckily, I have responded to shootings where multiple people died, but not like a school shooting. But I
Hmm.
have interviewed school shooting survivors, and I always wondered what happens 10 years later. And then in this book, Map of My Escape, it's about three people who were affected by the school shooting, who survived the school shooting. Two were students, one was a cop that responded, and
Mm.
what happened to them, and how did this pivotal event in their lives change them, and how did it change them? And
Hmm.
so I really wanted to look at that, but I also wanted to look at if you were a fugitive right now, how
Hmm.
would you escape? Like our lives are so digitally surveyed that how would you couldn't use your phone. You
Right.
couldn't, I mean, if you're really going to escape, you have to leave everyone. You can't talk to anyone. You can't email anyone. You can't have any kind of footprint online.
Mm.
How would you do it? And that was kind of the challenge. Like, how could you realistically do this? And so I really researched it and spent a lot of time trying to map out how I would how I would actually do this. So,
Oh, yeah, totally. And honestly, like nowadays, to your point about like you can't use your phone, and so
mhm,
many people are dependent on it, not just from a phone capability, but even like if you want food, like so many places now, they just simply don't take cash.
mhm, mhm.
So, where what are you going to go to the guy next to you, hit him up and say, "Hey, here's $5. Would you buy this for me?" I mean, you're going to get pretty creative.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a challenge, but yeah, I also read books by people. It was also inspired in part by I I once did a series on women who were fugitives. This is back in the 1960s when, the weathermen and people like that, they had blown up banks and they were on the run, and they always went with their girlfriends. And the guys who were fugitives usually got caught eventually. The women, but they got caught, but they were very quiet. The women who have been fugitives are usually out in society. There's one woman in Minnesota who was on the PTA board, and she went to the legislature and very open. It's like you would never know that these people were fugitives because they have completely changed their lives.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So, I mean, was there anybody when you were writing Map of My Escape, like who did you trust to actually read the manuscript?
So my husband is a longtime newspaper editor and journalist, and I always say that he has a chainsaw when he's editing, and he says it's a scalpel. But we will have these massive fight. They're not really fights, but they're discussions about what I have to take out and what I have to do and this and that. And I think our kids have grown up on various books that I've written and that he's edited early drafts, and he's, and we're arguing about, not exactly misplaced commas, but, this character and what this person needs to do and what this person needs. And you need to cut this. No, you need more here. Yeah. So he read it, several drafts, and my son, because my son is the age of these characters in the book, and I wanted to make sure that I had the language correct, that I had, their interests correct. So I'm always trying to. I write realistic fiction, so I really want to make sure that it's accurate.
No, I really feel you on that because we're probably around the same age, and I've noted that somehow in my more recent years, I started reverting to the slang that I used when I was like in my teens and 20s. And I'm like, I haven't said dope in like 20 years. Why am I suddenly saying this? And I'm sure you then look at your, what you're writing, and it's like, wait a minute. I don't think anyone does this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Am I dating myself by this?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Same thing with clothing, right? Like I've noticed that actually more recently, like in the 80s, clothing is suddenly becoming a thing again. And it's like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Let me double check that this is, pertinent for what I'm actually writing in the time period. So yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. Um, so I know, and we hear about this in various writerly circles. Some authors, they have to write with music. Others cannot, they just can't focus with if music's on. How about you? Like, do you prefer music, no music, any kind of sound or white noise?
I don't like outside noise, and so I'm easily distracted. I usually do write, but it's almost always soundtracks. So they're movie soundtracks. And the reason why I do this is because I can't write words and then hear words that are being sung. So it really has to be music. And the reason why I like soundtracks, because soundtracks are written for the emotion of a movie. They're written to drive drama, and they're written to play on the viewer's emotions. So there's a rhythm to them that I think you don't have just if you were playing classical music or you're playing some sort of soundtrack. But I think that the soundtracks that I pick are usually pretty emotive, and I think that helps with the music. And if you're writing a piece that's someone that has died and you've got to go back to that place, I'll pick something that's like a real tear drencher, and so that helps me when I'm writing that kind of emotion.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant. Yeah. I am saying like, I love having classical music on in the background, like in general. But I can't have, I've actually had debates with authors around this. Like I can't have any kind of music on that has words, because
Yeah.
I find I start typing it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Oh crap! Right?
No, exactly. Exactly. I have done the same thing.
It's hilarious too. Like you just have to laugh at yourself. Like, oh, I must have really gotten into that song. Okay, so and I mean, considering your background, you really have quite a worldly um not just a career, but I'd say just in general. I mean, you have lived all over the world. You've done so much. And as a crime reporter, you've been, influenced or exposed to things that I'm sure many of us could not even conceive.
Mhm.
So if you had one thing that you could ask for to
Mhm.
change the world, what would that be?
Well, I would ask that we have peace and world peace, obviously. And in order to do that, women would have to rule the world.
Duh.
So, there's really two things, right?
All right, I'm right there. And and I know right now that I know this is your Nook where you are
Mhm.
live streaming with us from,
Mhm.
but what does your actual reading environment look and sound like?
Reading or writing?
I would say reading.
Okay.
Hmm.
So reading, I usually read in this is a little nook back there, and I usually read back there. Sometimes I read outside, but I do most of my reading in bed, actually.
Oh wow.
um, yeah, I probably read an hour, sometimes 2 hours before bed, and I just get in bed and read, and it's quiet, and there's no distractions, and yeah, that's when I read.
Cool. And I mean, since we went there, how about your writing environment? What's that look and sound like?
Um, what's interesting is that when I started writing, um, I had little kids at home,
Mm,
and I couldn't get anything done um, just an office in my house.
mm-hmm.
I remember once I had my daughters, slid a note under the door, Mom, I really miss you, or I don't remember what it was, but it just really makes you feel guilty. So I went off I applied to all these writers conferences, studios.
Mm,
Um, there's one in Vermont, there's one in Seattle. I mean, all over and I didn't expect to get in any of them.
mm,
This is when I was starting as a beginning writer,
mm-hmm,
beginning author.
mm-hmm,
I'd already been a journalist for some time, and I got into all of them.
mm,
So I went, and I literally was going for 6 months, like going from one to the other to the other. And my kids were big enough; they didn't need me at home,
yeah.
um, but I really appreciated having a studio, and
Mm,
I have had two of them.
mm.
One I converted a garage, and then another one I had built, like I designed it. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and what I really love is leaving your house
Mm-hmm,
and walking out into a different building. Virginia Woolf always says that a woman, a writer needs or a woman needs her own room. I
mm-hmm,
felt like I really needed a place that was completely separate.
mm.
In my current house, I live on the bottom floor, and then on the second floor is workspace.
Oh,
So,
cool.
so I have my office. My husband has he's also a writer. He has his office, and then we have a library in between, and
Mm-hmm,
that also works. But it's the idea is to keep it like separate, like you go into another world, like you're physically going there. I don't know, for
mm.
some reason that really works for me.
Oh, I no, I love that. We actually have my husband's a musician and a producer, and
Mhm.
we each have our own office,
Mhm.
but I love, I remember having at one point a space that I was basically renting out as an office,
Mhm.
and um, I would physically go there. I mean, it just changes your entire mentality,
Mhm.
and it really enables you to stay focused on like why you're there. So, I
Right.
mean, I love. I think that that's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Um, Now, if you had to pick, and again, this is another big like you're a reader, you're a writer debate, right? Would you pick paperback, ebook, or
Mhm.
audio?
So I prefer paper,
Okay.
but I'm an old school journalist, and I really love the smell of paper. I love the smell of newspaper. I loved when there were newspapers and you were printing off, and you could go down to the printing shop, and you could, it just, there's a different feel to it. It's like,
Mm,
you know, it's like when you're a writer, so much of what you do is not physical.
mm,
It goes into the ether, it goes into data. But to be
mhm,
able to pick up, a book, and it's
mhm,
physical, right?
mhm,
Um, so I prefer that. Also, studies have been done, and when I was teaching at the university, I would often, encourage my students to read books, physical books, because they have done studies, and it shows that you retain knowledge or information much better if you read it
oh,
than
interesting.
in any other form. So I prefer print, but that doesn't mean, I have a long drive between my house here and in DC where I work.
Mhm,
And so I listen to books, audiobooks.
mhm,
And I'll also say that when I travel, which is extensively, particularly in the past, I always use a Kindle,
mm,
because how you can't get books, you can't get English language books in Central Asia or
mm.
Ukraine or wherever I'm at. So I've used all of those forms. I think they're all important, and they all have specific purposes. But if you ask me my preference, it would be definitely old fashioned paper.
Nice. Excellent. Now, this is also another, well, I wouldn't say it's a debate, but it's more of a, I think we all imagine this, right? Especially when we're reading. So if you could write yourself into a book, would you be a hero or a villain, and
Mhm.
why?
Well, I'd definitely be a villain. There's no question. I mean, the villains have the best lines, B, the most interesting lives. Uh, we had a play at church once, and I asked to be Judas, and everyone
Mm,
was like, "Why are you Judas?" I'm like, "He has the best lines. What are you saying?" You know? Uh, yeah, so definitely a villain. And if you're going to read something, I almost always pick something where there's a lot of conflict and a lot of action.
mm,
And in this particular book, at one point, I did have one of the villains as a third voice.
mm,
And I love that. I absolutely love that voice. And it was so much fun writing.
mhm.
But somebody told me, you just can't do that. You just
Why
can't.
not?
Um, well, for one thing, there were some issues because I was writing from a black man's voice,
Mhm,
which I also liked. I
mhm,
like the idea of embodying somebody else completely different than me. But
mhm,
I thought they were probably right, and I
mm,
also felt like having three different voices and to really be able to carry that off really well was
mhm.
difficult, and it took up way too much space.
Ah,
Anytime you have another narrative
mhm.
or another voice, then it's creating a lot more pages. So we had to cut at some point. So yes, I did lose that, but that is why, and I think you always have to consider that.
Mm,
Um, and be sensitive too to
mhm,
whose voice um, are you trying to portray? And I did have people who looked at that voice and said, "Yeah, this is tried to help me make it authentic." But
mhm.
I think I have a lot more fun writing in someone's perspective that's not me.
Right,
I mean, that's why we're novelists, right? We get to
right.
be other people.
Well, I gotta tell you, if you ever choose to write a novel that includes the perspective of the air quotes villain, because I truly believe that the most effective characters are ones that are so multidimensional, multidimensional as we all are, right?
Mhm,
As human
mhm.
beings are. They're not truly just a villain, right? I mean,
Right.
all of those things that made them who they are. Um, when it's done really effectively and you really feel for those characters and feel like, oh, I totally get why, he just killed 20
Mhm.
million people. Wait a minute. Why am I actually like rooting for the villain,
Right.
or why do I feel like my heart's breaking because they've been found,
Right. And
Um,
that's really a much more modern aspect to writing. I mean, it used to be that you could not do that. Like there were
agreed.
very, very strong rules about who could be the hero of the story,
Right.
and the hero definitely couldn't be a murderer. But
Right.
now you see all kinds of books and movies where the hero has a very good reason for killing people. Although I
Hmm.
hate to say that, but yeah.
Well, or for doing something that's perceived in our society as unacceptable.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but yeah, if you ever choose to go down that path, not personally, but within fiction, I would adore reading it. So,
Okay.
okay, so now, dun dun dun. So, if you could just tell us two truths and a lie.
Mhm. What's interesting is I had to do this recently at work, and no one got it. So,
Mm. Okay.
one, I used to be Jesse Jackson's editor.
Okay.
Maybe people don't remember who Jesse Jackson is,
No,
but
I did. I know.
okay. Two, I once flew with the Blue Angels.
Okay.
And three, I once wore a wire and went into a drug house to buy cocaine.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I would actually believe all three were true. So, uh,
um,
I would. I have no idea.
Actually,
Yeah.
all three are true. I
Oh.
forgot that one was supposed to be a lie. Yeah, all three are true.
Oh wow. Cool. Okay. Yeah. And now I'm just jealous on all 3 points. So,
I will say that the last one, I'm not a drug mule.
well, no.
But I was doing a story on what it was like to be a drug snitch.
Mm,
Because what people don't understand is that the police departments use drug snitches and they pay them. And most of the drug snitches are actually just drug dealers.
mm.
And they want to knock off some other drug dealer. So they narc on that drug dealer. So they get paid tax paid dollars
Wow.
to these. So that's why I was doing this piece on, and I was hanging out with these snitches, and it was pretty dangerous actually. And
Mm.
one of them would only hang out at strip clubs, and I got really tired of it. And so I went to the police department of this one who allowed me to interview their snitches. And I
Yeah.
said, could I go out with them so I know what it's like? Because I
Mhm.
want to be able to write that authentically,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because that's got to be really scary. You're a drug dealer and you're going into a drug house pretending that you're like, you're undercover basically.
Yeah.
So they said, okay, we'll do it. And I said, well, you can't make a case out of this. This just has to be for me. You have to
Mhm.
be willing to do it for me. And
Mhm.
so the police department gave me a wire. I went in, and at the time I was a crime reporter, and most of these guys had been in jail at one time or another, and apparently they had seen me and
Oh.
knew who
Whoops.
I was.
Oh no.
And my safe word was Kentucky. I don't know how I was going to work that into a sentence, but it was Kentucky. And so they were like, "Hey, you're that reporter," and I'm like,
I
"Yeah."
am.
And they're like, "What are you doing here?" And I mean, I had to come up with something like really quick and
Yeah.
believable, and I just said, "A girl has needs," and they bought it. They sold me drugs.
Oh my god.
So,
So
anyway,
no need for Kentucky.
no need for Kentucky, but it has a special meaning to me. Safe word.
Oh. Oh my goodness, I love it. At least it was a relatively, it wasn't like, bedazzle or something, right? Like there's
Yeah,
no way.
right. Right, exactly.
Okay, so what on the daily, so in your daily routine,
Mhm.
do you prefer tea or coffee?
I prefer coffee.
Mm.
That's pretty standard for old time journalists. I mean, and then Diet Coke, and then I have to stop, and then there's like a, you know, 3 or 4 hours when you can't drink anything, and then you get to drink wine.
I was gonna ask if you have that. Like I know, like I drink way too much coffee, but I
Mhm.
definitely can't have coffee after like 2, 3 o'clock.
Yeah, I stopped.
Otherwise,
Yeah,
yeah.
No. At 2 o'clock, ding dong, you cannot have any more coffee. No more caffeine. And then there's like 3 hours where you're like, and then then it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and so
Clearly.
there's
Well,
your reward for the day.
yeah, excellent. Very, very cool. Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. I can't wait for our next chat in a few weeks. So thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us for 20 questions. And guys, if you are watching this and it's the recording, and you have any questions for Cheryl, just toss it in the chat. We all monitor the chat on all of our live streams regularly so that we can go back and respond to them. And don't forget to pick up Cheryl's latest Map of My Escape coming out in June. So with that, again, thank you so much, Cheryl. It has truly been a pleasure.
Thank you